My hands were shaking as I grabbed the edge of the kitchen sink. My knuckles were white as I struggled to catch my breath through the sobs that were racking my body. The sound of the front door slamming echoed through the empty house, like a final punctuation mark on the look of shock and betrayal in Michael's eyes. How had I let things get this far in just a few reckless months? I had torn apart the family I loved, leaving nothing but shattered trust and broken hearts in my wake. My name is Sarah. This is the story of how I nearly destroyed everything I held dear. It was a Tuesday evening when I first realized how bad things had gotten between my husband Michael and me. I remember because it was already nighttime. I'd spent an hour in the kitchen preparing Michael's favorite meal. The kids, Emily and Liam, were at my mom's for the week, so I thought we could have a nice, quiet dinner together, maybe even talk like we used to. I heard the garage door open at 8. It was 8 p.m. It was about an hour and a half later than usual when Michael got home. I heard the sound of his keys hitting the bowl by the door, and then his footsteps. "Michael, dinner's ready," I called out, trying to keep my voice light. He appeared in the doorway, his tie loose around his neck and dark circles under his eyes. "Hey," he mumbled, barely looking at me. "Sorry, I'm not hungry. I had a sandwich at work. The office, I was disappointed. I tried to hide it, but it's taco night, your favorite." He glanced at the spread on the table, a flicker of guilt crossing his face. "I'm sorry. I've got a big presentation tomorrow. I need to prep." And just like that, he was gone, disappearing into his home office. I stood there surrounded by taco shells and congealing cheese, I felt more alone than I had in years. This wasn't the Michael I married. The Michael I fell in love with would have swept me into his arms, kissed me deeply, and told me how much he appreciated me. But that Michael had been fading away for months now. Ever since he got that big promotion at his job as a financial analyst, I'd been sinking into a chair at the table, picking at the food I'd so carefully prepared. How did we end up here? When did we stop talking? When did I become nothing more than a ghost in my own home? As I sat there, I couldn't help but think back to the early days of our relationship. We met in college. He was a charming business major, and I was a quiet art student. I got the shivers. We'd stay up all night just talking and dreaming about our future together. Now, 10 years and 2 kids later, those dreams seem so far away. I loved our life and our children more than anything in this world. But somewhere along the way, Michael and I had lost each other. I cleaned up dinner, wrapped the leftovers, and stored them in the fridge. I worked, and I could hear Michael's voice from his office. He was probably on a call with his team, preparing for whatever big deal they were working on. I used to love listening to him talk about his work. It was so inspiring. Now it just felt like a wall between us. That night, I lay in bed alone, staring at the ceiling. Michael didn't come to bed until well past midnight. Even then, he just collapsed onto his side without saying anything. I wanted to reach out and touch him to try to bridge this gap between us, but I didn't. I was afraid he'd pull away, and I didn't think I could bear that rejection. The next morning, I went to work to an empty bed. Michael had already left for work. There was a note on the kitchen counter. "Big day today. Don't wait up. 5 words, that's all." As I sipped my coffee, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had to change. I couldn't keep living like this, feeling like a stranger in my own marriage. But what could I do? I loved Michael, I really did. But love wasn't enough if he wasn't there to receive it. Little did I know that change was coming, and it would arrive in the form of my new boss, James Parker. I'd been working part-time. I'd been working for a local marketing firm for about a year, mostly to keep myself busy while the kids were at school. It wasn't anything groundbreaking, but I enjoyed the work and the chance to use my creativity. James had just taken over as the new creative director, and from the moment he walked into the office, everything changed. He was tall with salt and pepper hair and the kind of smile that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. When he looked at me, he really looked at me. I felt seen for the first time in months. "Sarah, right?" he said, stopping by my desk. "I've been looking. Your work shows you have a real eye for design." I felt myself blushing. "Thank you. I'm still learning." He leaned against my desk. The design is subtle but intoxicating. Don't sell yourself short. I think you've got real potential. How would you feel about taking on more responsibility? There's a big project coming up, and I could really use someone with your talents. My heart was racing. I stammered. Thank you for the opportunity, James smiled. I swear the whole room lit up. Excellent. We'll be working closely together on this one. I'm looking forward to it. As he walked away, I found myself watching him for the first time in a long while. I felt a spark of excitement and a glimmer of hope that I might finally be valued. I should have known then that I was playing with fire, but when you've been cold for so long, even the smallest flame feels like salvation. That night, as I lay in bed next to Michael's sleeping form, I couldn't stop thinking about James. The way he looked at me, the way he valued my work. I told myself it was just professional admiration, nothing more. But deep down, I knew I was lying to myself, and that was just the beginning. Over the next few weeks, James and I spent more and more time together. We worked late nights at the office on the big project, and we made coffee runs together, which turned into long conversations about art, life, and our dreams. He listened to me in a way Michael hadn't in years. He made me laugh and made me feel alive again. One night, we were the last two left in the office. I was hunched over my computer trying to finish a design that just wasn't cooperating. Sarah, James said softly, placing a hand on my shoulder. It's late. You should go home. I looked up at him, suddenly aware of how close he was. I just want to get this right, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He smiled that smile that made my heart skip a beat. You're too hard on yourself. It's perfect, just like you. Before I could react, he leaned down and kissed me. It was soft and tentative at first, but then deepened into something more, something dangerous. I knew I shouldn't want it, but I couldn't resist. When we finally broke apart, I was breathless, guilty, exhilarated, and terrified. I should go, I stammered, grabbed my things, and practically ran out of the office as I drove home, my lips still tingling from Jan's kiss. I felt a storm of emotions. I felt guilty, yes, but also a thrill I hadn't felt in years. A part of me that I thought had died long ago had suddenly sparked back to life. I pulled into our driveway, my hands shaking as I turned off the engine. Through the window, I could see Michael in his usual spot on the couch. The TV was on in the background, and Michael didn't even look up as I came in. Hey, I'm sorry I'm late, I said, my voice trembling slightly. I'm sorry, he grunted in response, eyes still glued to the screen. There's some pizza left in the fridge if you're hungry. I stood there for a moment, waiting for something, a question. I wanted to ask him about my day, or maybe even give him a kiss hello. Anything to show that he noticed me and that he cared. But there was nothing. I lay in bed that night, my mind racing. What had I done? What was I doing? I loved Michael. I really did. But James made me feel alive again. He made me desire and valued. I told myself it was just a kiss. It wouldn't happen again. I could control this. But deep down, I knew this was just the beginning of a storm that would tear my life apart. I got a kiss that it wouldn't happen again, that I could control this. But deep down, I knew this was just the beginning of a storm that would tear my life apart. I was torn between two worlds. The next morning, I woke up feeling like I was living in two different worlds. There was a familiar world in my home, my marriage, my life with Michael. And then there was this new, exciting, dangerous world that had opened up with James. I went through the motions of my morning routine, making breakfast for the kids, packing their lunches. My mind was elsewhere, though. I felt guilty, and I also felt excited. What would happen when I saw James today? As I dropped the kids off at school, my daughter Emily gave me a strange look. Mom, are you okay? You seemed different for a moment. I panicked. Was it that obvious? Could an 8-year-old tell? I could see the turmoil inside her. I'm fine, sweetie, I said, forcing a smile. I'm just a little tired. Have a great day at school. I watched her skip into the building, her backpack bouncing with each step, and felt a fresh wave of guilt wash over me. What was I doing? How could I risk everything, my family, my marriage, for what? A few stolen moments of... I was excited, but as I pulled into the office parking lot and saw James's car, my heart started racing again. I was torn between guilt and desire, and we'd only shared one kiss. I took a deep breath straightened my blouse, and walked into the office. James was already there, leaning against my desk with 2 cups of coffee. He handed me one of the coffees, just how I like it, extra shot, splash of almond milk. I was really touched that he remembered how I like my coffee. I thanked him and took a sip. I took a sip and my cheeks flushed. James held up a hand. His expression was serious. "Sarah, I want you to know that I respect you both, as a colleague and as a person. What happened last night? I won't pretend I didn't want it, but if you tell me it can't happen again, I'll understand." I stood there, coffee warming my hands, staring into his eyes. This was my chance to put a stop to this and recommit to my marriage, to be the person I've always thought I was. But I couldn't find the words, so I said, "Maybe we should talk about this somewhere more private." James nodded and smiled. "My office lunch break." I nodded, already feeling my pulse quicken at the thought. The morning crawled by. I tried to focus on my work, but my mind kept drifting to James and the kiss we shared. What might happen during our lunch talk? When lunchtime finally rolled around, I felt like I was walking to the guarderie. I was torn between excitement and trepidation as I knocked softly on James's office door. "Come in," he called. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me. James was standing by the window, backlit by the midday sun. He looked gorgeous, if I may say so. "Sarah," he said softly. "I'm glad you came," I replied. "James," I started, but the words caught in my throat. What could I say? That I was married? He knew that, and that this was wrong. We both knew that too. He crossed the room in two. After a long struggle, we ended up standing so close that I could feel the heat radiating from his body. He whispered, "Tell me to stop." He told me that if I didn't want this, he'd never mention it again. I should have said something. I should have pushed him away and run out of that office and never looked back. Instead, I found myself reaching up and pulling him down to me. I kissed him with all the pent-up passion and frustration of the past few months. It was like a dam breaking. We were all hands, and his lips and breathless, intense kisses had me lifted onto his desk, papers scattered to the floor. I should have been mortified, but I wasn't. Anyone could walk in. This was so unprofessional, but I couldn't bring myself to care for those few stolen moments. I wasn't Sora, the neglected wife, or the worried mother. I was just Sora, a woman desired and wanting. When it was over, the reality of what we'd done came crashing down on me. I straightened my clothes with shaking hands, unable to meet Jing's. "Sarah," I said softly, reaching for her. "Are you okay?" She nodded, still unable to speak. What had she done? How could she face Michael after this? How could she face herself? This couldn't happen again. "I'm married," she said finally, looking up at him. "I have children." James nodded, his expression unreadable. "If that's what you want, Sarah," he said, "but I want you to know this wasn't just physical for me. I care about you deeply." She felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. "Please don't say that I can't. I can't hear that right now." I fled his office, barely making it to the bathroom before the tears started falling. What kind of person was I? How could I have done this to Michael and our family? But even as I berated myself, I couldn't forget the way James had made me feel alive and desired. I felt like there was an ocean between us. He was snoring softly, oblivious to the turmoil in I really wanted to wake him up and tell him everything, ask for forgiveness, but I was too scared. Instead, I stared at the ceiling, thinking about what had happened that day. I felt really guilty, but I also remembered how good James was with me, what he said to me, how he looked at me. I knew in that moment that even though I told James I was done, this wasn't over. I was terrified. The next few weeks were a blur of guilt, desire, and self-strength. I really tried to resist James, but every time I decided to end things, he'd do something to make me change my mind. He'd bring me coffee, just the way I liked it, praise my work in front of the whole team, or simply give me that look that made me feel like the most beautiful woman in the world. Our affair, if you could call it that, continued in stolen moments, hashed conversations in the supply closet, lingering touches as we passed in the hallway, and yes, more encounters in his office during lunch breaks. I swore it would be the last time. Each time I went back for more at home with Michael, things weren't getting any better. In fact, they were worse. He was working longer hours than ever, And when he was home, he was distant and distracted. I tried to reconnect with him to rekindle some of what we'd lost, but it felt like trying to light a fire with wet matches. One night, about a month into my relationship with James, Michael and I had a rare moment alone. The kids were in bed, and we were sitting on the couch, drinking tea. V was still droning in the background. "Michael," I said, turning to face him. "Can we talk?" He looked at me, surprise flickering across his face. "Sure, what's up?" I took a deep breath. This was my chance. I could tell them everything, beg for forgiveness, try to save our marriage. But as I opened my mouth, the words wouldn't come. Instead, I heard myself say, "I miss you. We barely talk anymore. I feel like we're drifting apart." Michael sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I know, Sarah. I'm sorry. It's just been crazy lately. This new position. I felt a lot of pressure. I tried to keep the frustration out of my voice, but we're supposed to be partners. I feel like I'm losing you." He reached out and took my hand in his. It was the first time he'd touched me in weeks. It wasn't just a quick kiss goodbye. "You're not losing me," he said. "Sora, I'm right here. It's just a phase. It'll get better. I promise." I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to believe him. But as I looked into his eyes, all I could see was James. James who made me feel alive. James who saw me. "I really saw me," I said softly, squeezing his hand. "I hope so." We went to bed after that, and for the first time in ages, Michael held me as I lay there in Michael's arms. I should have felt comforted, but I felt like a fraud. Here was my husband, the man I promised to love and cherish, holding me close, and all I could think about was another man. The next day at work, I tried to avoid James. I threw myself into my projects, keeping my head down and my door closed. But around lunchtime, there was a soft knock. James came in as I knew he would. He closed the door behind him. He said, "Sarah, are you okay? You've been avoiding me." James said, "I know you were torn, but I need you to know something." He took a deep breath. "I'm falling in love with you, Sarah. I think I might be falling for you too." His words hit me like a physical blow. Was this what love felt like? The thrill, the excitement, the way he made me feel seen and valued. Was that love, James? I started to say something, but he pressed a finger to my lips. "You don't have to say anything right now," he said. "I just needed you to know. Whatever you decide, whatever happens next, I'm here for you." "As long as you want me," he said, leaning in to kiss me softly. Then he was gone, leaving me alone with my thoughts and my guilt. The next few weeks were a roller coaster of emotion. I was living two lives, the beautiful wife and mother at home, and the woman in the throes of a passionate affair at work. The guilt was eating me alive, but I couldn't seem to stop. James was everything Michael wasn't. Right now, he was attentive and passionate. He made me feel beautiful and valued, but every time I looked at my children, every time Michael was absent, I kissed him goodbye mindlessly in the morning. I felt like the worst person in the world. Things came to a head at the company's annual summer party, which was a big event held at a swanky hotel downtown. Spouses were invited, which meant Michael would be there. The thought of him and James in the same room made me anxious. I spent hours getting ready, trying to look perfect for someone I wasn't sure anymore. When Michael saw me, he gave a low whistle. "Wow, Sarah," he said, "you look amazing." I had a glimmer of hope that tonight might be different and that we could reconnect. However, as soon as we arrived at the party, Michael was pulled away by some colleagues, leaving me alone by the bar. That's where James found me. "You look stunning," he murmured, his eyes dark with desire. "I wish I could kiss you right now." I felt myself blushing. "James, please. Michael's here." He nodded, his jaw tightening. I saw him earlier talking to the CEO. He seems like quite the rising star. There was an edge to his voice that I'd never heard before. Before I could say anything, Michael came up to me. "Sarah, there you are," he said, putting his arm around my waist. "I see you've met James. He's been doing great things in the marketing department." James just smiled, but it wasn't a real smile. "Thank you, Michael. Your wife has been an invaluable asset to our team." I stood there, trapped between the two men, feeling like I might spontaneously combust from the tension as the night wore on. I watched James drink more and more, and his eyes followed me everywhere I went, getting darker. The more he drank, the more intense it became. Michael, for his part, was actually being attentive for once, keeping his arm around me and introducing me to his colleagues. This was what I wanted, wasn't it? Michael paying attention to me and being proud of me. But all I could think about was James and the hurt in his eyes every time he saw Michael touch me. Everything fell apart when James took the stage to give a speech. He was clearly drunk, his words slightly slurred. "I want to thank everyone for coming tonight," he began, "especially those of you who actually make time for your spouses." There was an uncomfortable murmur through the crowd. I felt Michael stiffen beside me. James continued, his eyes locked on Michael. "You know, it's funny how some men have these beautiful, talented wives at home, and they don't even see them. They're too busy climbing the corporate ladder, too busy for date nights or conversations or, well, anything really." "What the hell is he talking about?" Michael muttered. I couldn't breathe. This couldn't be happening. "But hey, their loss is another man's gain, right?" James said with a bitter laugh. "Because let me tell you, when you neglect a woman, like, someone else will be there to pick up the pieces." Michael's arm dropped from around me. I could feel him staring at me, but I couldn't meet his eyes. "That's enough," someone said gently, leading James off the stage. The room erupted into awkward chatter. Everyone was pretending they hadn't just witnessed what they had. I finally forced myself to look at Michael. His face was a mask of confusion and dawning realization. "What was that about?" I asked. Before I could answer, James appeared beside us, swaying slightly. "My man," he said. Michael was slurring his words as he asked James how it felt to be married to the most beautiful woman in the room and not even notice her. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Michael's face contorted with rage as he punched James in the jaw. James stumbled backward, but Michael followed, hitting him again and again. People were shouting and trying to pull Michael off James, but he was like a man possessed. When they finally separated them, James was on the floor, his face bloody. Michael stood over him, his chest heaving, his knuckles split and bleeding. The room was silent, everyone staring. At us, I felt like I was going to be sick. "We're leaving," Michael growled, grabbing my arm and practically dragging me out of the hotel. The car ride home was silent. Michael's hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white. I wanted to say something, anything, but I couldn't. I was too shocked to speak when we got home. Michael went straight to the guest room and slammed the door behind him. I stood in the hallway, listening to the sound of him throwing things and muffled curses coming through the door. I sank to the floor and finally let the tears come. What I did, how I let things get so out of control. I was sitting there sobbing in my beautiful dress. I realized that my life as I knew it was over. The question was what would be left when the dust settled. The next few days were a blur of silence and tension. Michael refused to speak to me. He was sleeping in the guest room and leaving for work before I woke up. The kids could sense something was wrong. They were tiptoeing around us like we were bombs about to explode. I called in sick to work. I couldn't face James. It was all a result of the party. My phone was flooded with messages and missed calls from. I couldn't bring myself to respond. What could I possibly say on the third day of this agonizing silence? I couldn't take it anymore. I waited until Michael came home and cornered him in the kitchen. "We need to talk," I said, my voice shaking. Michael looked at me, and I saw the pain and betrayal in his eyes. In his eyes, I nearly broke down. I told him about Sarah, about how he'd treated me, about how he'd made me look like an idiot in front of everyone I work with. I flinched at his words, but I knew I deserved them. I apologized, but he just laughed. It was a harsh, bitter sound. He said, I'm sorry if you had any idea what you've done to me or to our family." Tears were streaming down my face. "I know I've ruined everything, but please, Michael, let me explain. I want to explain what he said and how you could throw away 10 years of marriage. I want to explain how you could betray me like this." I took a deep breath to calm myself down. "Michael, you were never there for me. When you were, it felt like you didn't even see me. I felt invisible and unappreciated. James made me feel seen." Michael's face showed anger and pain. "I'm to blame because I was working hard. To provide for our family, no," I cried. "No, it's not your fault, it's mine. I made a terrible mistake. But Michael, our marriage was in trouble long before James came along. We stopped talking, stopped connecting. Can you honestly say you were happy? He was quiet for a long moment, and I saw the fight go out of him. He slumped against the counter, suddenly looking old and tired. No, he admitted quietly, I wasn't happy, but I never imagined you'd do this. We stood there in silence, the weight of our broken marriage hanging between us. Finally, Michael spoke again. I don't know if I can ever forgive you for this. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. His words hit me like a physical blow, but I knew I deserved them. I understand, I said softly, but I want to try. Michael, if you'll let me, I want to try to fix this, to fix us. He looked at me for a long moment. There was a long moment of silence as he looked at me, searching my face. I didn't know if there was anything left to fix. He finally said, I need time and space. I can't look at you right now without seeing you with him. I nodded, tears spilling down my cheeks. Okay, whatever you need, I'll be here for you, Michael. When you're ready to talk or try, I'll be here. He nodded once, then left the kitchen. A few minutes later, I heard the front door close. He was gone again, and I was alone with the consequences of my actions. Sinking to the kitchen floor, I took a moment to process what I'd done. I'd betrayed my husband, jeopardized my children's stability, and all for a few moments of feeling desired and the excitement of forbidden romance. I thought about James and the passion and connection I felt with him, but now, in the harsh light of reality, it all seemed hollow. Was it worth destroying I didn't know how to fix this, or if it could be fixed, but I knew I had to try for Michael, for our children, and for the woman I used to be. I'd never dreamed of causing this much pain. Sitting there on the cold kitchen floor, I made a vow to myself. I would fight for my marriage. I would become the wife and mother my family deserved. I would somehow find a way to forgive myself. The weeks that followed were a painful journey. Michael remained distant and closed off, sleeping in the guest room. We barely spoke to each other. Apart from talking about the kids, there was no communication at all. I really wanted to fix things. I gave Michael the space he wanted, but I was still longing to tell him everything and ask for forgiveness. I felt really guilty and remorseful, and it got worse day by day. James kept calling and texting, getting more desperate with each unanswered attempt. I deleted them all, as I had to cut him out of my life completely if there was any hope of salvaging my marriage. The kids, bless their hearts, could sense the tension in the household. Emily and Liam walked on eggshells around us. Their bright smiles were dimmed by the palpable unhappiness in my home. I hated myself for putting them through this and jeopardizing their sense of security and stability. Desperate for guidance, I reached out to a therapist. I needed someone I could talk to without fear of judgment. The sessions were painful, as I was forced to confront the deepest, darkest corners of my own psyche. I had to face up to the darkest corners of my own psyche. I had to ask myself why I had betrayed my family, what void I was trying to fill, and how I could possibly rebuild the trust I had so carelessly shattered. The therapist was a kind, fair woman named Dr. Abigail. She listened patiently as I poured out my story and my voice. She made me think about things I hadn't considered before. She asked probe questions that forced me to dig deeper within myself. Sarah, what drew you to this other man? I was heavily involved in my marriage, but I guess Michael and I grew distant and disconnected. I felt invisible and unappreciated, and then James came along and made me feel seen and desired. Dr. Abigail nodded her head in agreement. Her expression was calm and understanding. She asked how that made me feel about myself, my worth as a partner and a person. I swallowed hard, the words catching in my throat. I felt awful and guilty. I knew what I was doing was wrong, but I couldn't stop myself. I hated the person I had become. The therapist said that she understood my feelings, but that I couldn't move forward until I learned to forgive myself. She said that carrying that burden of guilt would only make it harder for me to heal. I nodded, tears spilling down my cheeks. I want to forgive myself, but I don't know how I can when I've had the people I love most taken from me. Dr. Abigail acknowledged this. Rebuilding trust, especially after such a profound betrayal, is a long and difficult process. However, it is not impossible. What is important now is that you are willing to do the work, both for yourself and for your marriage over the following weeks. I poured my heart and soul into the therapy sessions, exploring the roots of my loneliness and the reasons I had sought validation outside of my marriage. It was painful. It was tough going, but I knew it was necessary if I ever hoped to fix the damage I had done. I slowly but surely started to understand myself better. I realized I had been resentful towards Michael for being emotionally distant, and that I had let my own needs take a backseat to demands of work and parenting. It all came bubbling to the surface, and with that understanding came a newfound empathy, not just for Michael, but for myself as well. You can't control Michael's choices or actions. Dr. Abigail told me in one session, what you can do is take responsibility for your own. What matters now is how you move forward and rebuild what's been broken. With that advice in mind, I approached Michael. I mustered every ounce of courage I had. He was distant and wary, but I could see the glimmer of hope in his eyes, hope that I might finally be ready to have the difficult sculpture. We really needed to have a chat, Michael. I know I've put you through the mill, and I know it won't be easy to rebuild trust, but I want you to know that I'm committed to doing whatever it takes to heal our marriage. Michael studied me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Sora, I don't know if I can do this. The pain, the betrayal, it's still so fresh. How can I trust that you won't hurt me again? Hi again. I reached out tentatively, taking his hand in mine. You're right. It won't be easy, but I'm going to prove to you every single day that I'm worthy of your trust. I'll be honest. I'll be vulnerable. I'll do whatever it takes because I love you, Michael. I can't bear the thought of losing you. Tears shimmered in his eyes, and for the first time in months, he squeezed my hand back. Okay, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Okay, let's try.